Hello and welcome. Thanks everyone for joining today. And before we get into the presentation, if you're interested in Node Zero, reach out to your Optiv account rep to get more details on the product, to get a demo and learn more about it. But today's title of our presentation is Harnessing the Attacker's Perspective for Ongoing Security Validation. So kind of before I get into this, just to kind of set the stage of my background, I've worked in offensive security for over 12 years, cybersecurity for over 20. I've worked in consulting and worked as an internal resource pen testing. And one of the things I've really seen over my career and seen the value in Node Zero is the fact that we've got so much to do as pen testers, but we've got so little staff, uh, so little budget to hire consultants. And so we need a way to scale. And one of the things that really struck me was I used to work for a large bank. We had 13 people on our team, and we only got through half of our PCI pen testing per year. We did some automation. We had some wrapper scripts, which would chain together different tools that we'd use on our pen test to try to help automate and help the process, but it just really wasn't enough. And whenever I found out about Node Zero and I saw what it's capable of doing, that was what I was really impressed with and decided to join the company. And the nice thing about it is just the scalability of the tool, but we'll get into some more of the details. So this is kind of a little overview of what we're going to discuss today. We're basically the nuts and bolts of it is we're going to discuss how, you know, validation security is done, security validation is currently done, kind of some of the gaps and how those gaps can be addressed. And then we're going to get into overcoming those gaps a little bit more using Node Zero and showing some of the value there that what Node Zero provides. So security validation overview. So security validation assesses the security posture of systems environments. The most effective methods are leveraging offensive security techniques. So we always hear about companies are breached by nation states, threat actors, or hackers. So we need to use that same mindset when we're assessing those assets. So there's different approaches to security validation. So the most common you're seeing out there is going to be vulnerability scanning. This is running Nexpose, Nessus, Qualys, reoccurring scans against your environments, looking for CVEs, configuration vulnerabilities, and then patching and remediating, kind of following that vulnerability management cycle. And then with pen testing or penetration testing, you're using more of a threat actor perspective. You're going in using different hacking tools and techniques. You're running vulnerability scanners and different hacking tools trying to find vulnerabilities. One of the things we're doing in a pen test compared to vulnerability scanning, we're actually validating those vulnerabilities to see if they're true vulnerabilities. Because one of the shortcomings of vulnerability scanners, although they can be a necessary uh, tool in your vulnerability management program, sometimes they fall in false positives. And sometimes they miss out, leading to false negatives. So we need ways to validate whether these are true findings using other tools to look for vulnerabilities and not just depending on the vulnerability scanner. And once those vulnerabilities are validated, then the assessor goes in and tries to exploit those vulnerabilities using different tools and techniques. And sometimes they'll use secondary vulnerability scanners and different various penetration testing tools and hacking tools. And so red teaming is another approach. This is organizations that once they're a little more mature, they'll actually do red teaming. And red teaming, sometimes there's kind of confusion between the two. And pen testing and red teaming are used synonymously, but real red teaming or adversary emulation, you're going in trying to emulate a threat actor. No one is aware that it's going on besides the control team. The control team is typically the CISO, some other people in management, because they really don't want the defenders knowing it's going on, because part of a red team exercise is to test the reaction of the people. It's not only testing the technology. Pen testing, you can test the people as well through social engineering, but red teaming, we're testing the reactions. Are they following the incident response plan? Are they detecting, able to block and contain the threat actor? So it's more of an emulation of a real world attack. And so some of the gaps that we're seeing is time, coverage, cadence, human resources and skills. So pen testing is referred to commonly as a time box test. It's kind of a snapshot of your security posture at that moment. Uh, Also coverage. So how much are you covering? One of the things that's happened over the years with pen testing was compliance-based pen testing really drove the need for pen testing. At one time, companies weren't as commonly doing pen tests, having pen tests performed, but then PCI data security standard come along and required pen testing. And so this is usually typically a pen test per year. The coverage is usually only the card data environment. Uh, and back to the cadence, it's once a year. Human resources are kind of can affect how much testing is being done. And the skills, this is a highly skilled type of trade, and it takes someone many years to get to a being competent in testing these, using these methods and so forth. So these are some of the limitations that we're seeing. Uh, the cadence once a year is not really enough. I think some of the standards are requiring twice a year. And one of the examples of why you need to test frequently, a good example, it was one of the companies I was consulting for. We did a pen test against this environment. It was the external environment of this organization. Fortunately, they had a 90-day retest. So they had us come back 90 days later to see how well they did remediating those vulnerabilities. And during that time, they did a great job. They remediated all the criticals, highs, and mediums. There were just some lows and informational vulnerabilities left, which is typically ideal. But when we came back and did that test, we start out the pen test doing our vulnerability scans, and one of the things we noticed is one of those low criticality vulnerabilities was now exploitable. A security researcher had figured out how to exploit that vulnerability, and now it was exploitable. If they hadn't done the retest, that vulnerability would have been open for a year before the next pen test. And so every time you're performing a pen test, you want to make sure you're doing the remediation and then the frequency, because these vulnerabilities are being exploited. You hear of some of these vulnerabilities that have kind of been around for like 20 years, and someone figured out how to exploit it. And sometimes there's these vulnerabilities laying open that you're not aware of that could be exploited. So overcoming these gaps. So one of the ways we do that is increasing pen testing cadence through more frequent and continuous pen testing, implement autonomous pen testing, such as Node Zero. And this improves your scalability and frequency, and easier to duplicate the manual testing. So one of the gaps that we see in manual pen testing is it's a repetitive task. Pen testers usually have their methodology. They have a checklist of things that they're testing that they go through and manually test. And so they check these off the list. Maybe they're overworked, they're really busy and unable to get around to hitting everything on the list. Things get missed. But using autonomous pen testing, then you're assured that everything on that list is being checked, it's being tested. So you're making sure that it's being tested. And so that's one of the values to autonomous pen testing. And so now we're going to get into kind of some of the top 10 techniques that we're seeing. And so we also show the impact. So the top 10 techniques and to achieve critical impact. So brute force, weak and default credentials across protocols, including SSH, FTP, web, etc. RDP, remote desktop protocol in your Windows environments, is another popular protocol that threat actors like to exploit. Credential dumping and reuse across Windows and Linux hosts. One of the things that's gotten difficult for pen testers is to get that initial foothold from the outside. And so we're depending a lot on password dumps that companies have been breached and the password's been dumped. This is some of the ways that we're able to get a foothold externally. And so we're also using that with our Node Zero tool. Public facing assets, discovery, and perimeter host exploitation. A prime example here is some cases pen testers have discovered HMI interfaces for ICS and critical infrastructure, which means that a threat actor gets access to this console, they could shut down and control like water treatment facilities and other types of manufacturing. And this is not good. So this is one of the things when, one of the things we see that's kind of a top 10 technique being used by threat actors. Lateral movement via insufficient network segmentation. So this is one we see a lot on pen testing. One of the reasons they have you test for network segmentation is to make sure that someone gains access to this environment, they can't get access to like your card holder data environment, or even like back to the case of ICS, industrial control systems, OT environments. You don't want someone to get in to that environment. Those environments are a little more hard to secure because of the fragility of those assets. Sometimes testing or scanning could take down those systems. Patching sometimes is not always options. So we need to make sure those are segmented. And this is where the lateral movement is a popular technique, but one that you need to test for. Man-in-the-middle attacks and relay attacks. These are very popular, and even outside of wired networks, these are very popular in Wi-Fi networks. Windows Active Directory privilege escalation vectors such as Kerberoasting, exploitation, misconfiguration, and vulnerabilities in routers, ILOs, iDRACs, etc. Open source intelligence password spraying of credentials. As I mentioned earlier, those password dumps are very popular with threat actors to gain that foothold. Exploitation of misconfiguration and vulnerabilities in DevOps tools such as Jenkins, GitLab, Kubernetes, Dockers, and GitHub. Exploitation of critical CISA recognized vulnerabilities in remote code execution. So that's a really good resource if you're not taking advantage of it, is CISA's known exploitable vulnerability list. And so you can see over here, to achieve critical impact, that these different methods that were used to gain domain compromise. So we're able to domain 8 incidents of domain compromise through LSA dump, MBT, NS poisoning possible, LSAS dump, Veeam credential disclosure, EC8, zero login. You also see critical infrastructure compromise. We had like 9 instances there. Host compromise, 431, 157 domain users compromised, and 61 ransomware exposures, and then 143 incidents of sensitive data exposure. And a lot of times this is one of the ways that threat actors are finding a foothold in environments, is they go back to some of those misconfigurations and some of the misconfigurations of DevOps tools, and also data storage. Sometimes you see these exploits through shared drives within an on-prem environment, or cloud shares that these shares have been open. Sometimes developers and IT staff may leave credentials in there, because one popular method is to go in and search for information like spreadsheets that would include credentials to the different systems. And this is a very popular method with pen testers, and especially with threat actors. Sometimes you hear about some of these breaches and it's not really something really elaborate or took someone with a lot of skill to get into. It was just someone kind of poking around the network, and they were able to find, these credentials. And so with Node Zero, you're empowering your blue team to understand, fix, and retest. So one of the points mentioned earlier is that how difficult it is to learn pen testing, to get the skilled pen testers. And with our tool, you're able to empower your blue team to understand, fix, and retest. So here within the product, you can see Node Zero, the different attack paths. And we can see here that we exploited a weakness in Java JMX. You can see here where the file was retrieved, the Windows INI file, and details about this. So we see that it's critical. And what we do also, outside of just showing the criticality, we show the attack path and how it was able to be compromised. Because one of the things you'll see attackers do, they're chaining together less critical vulnerabilities to gain access. And there's a stat that CISA shared several years ago, where a lot of threat actors are chaining together these mediums and low level vulnerabilities to be able to gain access. And so with this tool, you're able to arm your blue team to be able to come in and use this tool. And the interesting thing about this tool, use case wise, is we have consulting companies that are using this to perform their pen tests. It's able to scale their pen test, help them do more in less time and be more creative and dig in more onto the application side, just other different areas that they have more time to test. So we're able to do that in a quicker manner. And one of the things too with Node Zero, you're able to get domain compromise in matters of minutes. And some experienced consulting companies, this may take hours, possibly a day or even more to gain domain compromise. And so this creates a bias for action. So using this tool really motivates and arms teams to be able to remediate and fix these issues in a more timely manner. You're able to look at the impact and not just the vulnerability, see the impact and see what to prioritize when you're remediating these vulnerabilities. And so we see over here the options that you have to be able to remediate. So one option is disable JMX. Another option is to configure a firewall whitelist. And also another option is to configure user authentication on the JMX server. So we show your team how to remediate these. And one of the interesting things about using this product, we've had customers that got the product. One use case or example is this customer, they were testing like once a year. They got the product and I believe they're up to testing like 30 times a month. And when you first start out, you see a lot of impact, a lot of critical vulnerabilities. But as time goes along, you're going through testing, remediating. There may be still some vulnerabilities, but the impact and the likelihood of getting exploited reduces. Help tame your attack surface and help kind of prevent further exploits. But just going and testing. And so this also shows the details there of what was used the tools used against that, and using like Metasploit. There's one Metasploit module there as well. And see, this also shows the attack path. So the base score is 9.1 score, and then 31 attack paths. So this weakness was leveraged by 31 attack paths, leading to critical impacts, including domain compromise, affecting domain, and it's the name of the domain name in our range, and a host compromise affecting domain controllers. So this shows the impact, actually what's going on. A lot of times when you do your vulnerability scans, you see what's likely, but you're not really seeing the impact or what it can do. And interesting enough, there's been cases where people have used our tool and they've used tools like CrowdStrike and other vulnerability scanners that saw like the print nightmare vulnerability was still vulnerable and that environment was not vulnerable, but through using Node Zero, we were able to compromise and see that it was still vulnerable. So context matters. Think low plus low equals critical. So within this console, you're able to see the weaknesses, impacts as mentioned before, and then you see the proof for these. So SMB signing not required. So you see that's a security misconfiguration. So you see what category this is in, the affected asset, downstream impacts. So as we mentioned earlier, is domain compromise, host compromise, and domain user compromise. And then we also see SMB signing not required. Sometimes you may see this in a pen test, but you may not see any kind of impact. And so here we actually compromise the host using this particular exploiting this vulnerability. And then here is another instance here. You see several instances of the domain compromise not required, or not signing not required. And so then you can take action. So you can go in and do one click to verify. So you can go through and verify if it's still vulnerable after you've done your remediation. So this makes it quicker to validate. And one of the things too with our product is the rapid response. So one of the nice things is once everything is inventoried within Node Zero, it's aware of those systems, and you can go through and do rapid response. We're able to check and see whether these are vulnerable to those specific exploits, because exploits come out all the time. Our researchers are finding new ways to exploit that, adding it. And as these vulnerabilities are exploitable, then you're able to use rapid response to go through and validate whether they're vulnerable or not. After you remediate, maybe they're still vulnerable. After remediation, you can go back and retest. And so this is a quick way to be able to validate these critical vulnerabilities in your environment. Based on my experience working as a pen tester and working as an internal resource, one of the things we'd routinely have to do is go through, log4j, whatever the big critical vulnerability comes out. We're having to go through, run vulnerability scanners. Some of the vulnerability scanners will create, for instance, Tenable or Nessus. They create a new module within their product that will look for the vulnerabilities. But the thing about that is that you've got to run through and completely rescan the environment. With Node Zero, the rapid response, you're able to go through and look for those particular vulnerabilities and not have to spend all the time rescanning everything in your environment. We're testing for just the one item. That module is just an updated module that tests for particular new exploitable vulnerabilities. So what else we also do is we verify your tool. So this is kind of, just think purple teaming. Think of a purple team culture. Purple teaming has become pretty popular. So we provide a way to verify your tool security. So CrowdStrike, your Splunk instances, SentinelOne, Exabeam, etc. So did you detect us? Did you log us? Did you alert us? Did you stop us? So these are things that you would normally do during a purple team exercise, but you're able to perform within this tool. And you can see the different commands that were run. So you can go through and repeat these from the output of our tool. So if you want to go back and run these manually within your environment or within Node Zero, within a console where you're running Node Zero, you can go through and run these manually. So it shows exactly what's coming. So there's no guesswork behind that. Some of your vulnerability scanners, you really don't know what's going on. All you know is they're looking for certain vulnerabilities. Here we show you exactly what was done and where these fall into MITRE attack tactics. So we see this first one up here is reconnaissance discovery. We see several of these where we're just going through looking for these vulnerabilities. And one of the things that Node Zero does too, one of the things I was really impressed when I saw Node Zero for the first time is we go through and we use tools like ZMAP to do host discovery more quickly. Once we discover hosts, then we'll go back and use Nmap and dig deeper using different types of service scans and looking for certain ports once we find what's active, and we do a deeper dive. So we're able to get to those quicker and then get into more of a deep dive, doing further scanning with different tools and Nmap, and also using different man-in-the-middle tools. So we have a really robust man-in-the-middle feature within our product that will test like the LLM&R vulnerabilities using Responder and other tools, testing for man-in-the-middle, and not just depending on one tool. And as mentioned before, this is a repeatable process. So since this is automated, the scripts and automation with our product will go through and test those. So all these things are being addressed. And back to that purple team mentality, this is on top of just making sure you're doing continuous testing and remediation. Having that purple team mentality is very helpful. So one of the things during these exercises, during your Node Zero scans, you can go through and monitor to see if you're being detected on that network. Because one of the things that I've kind of experienced over the years as a pen tester, I tested this environment once that the CISO of the company was very knowledgeable, had a pen testing background. Their team was routinely being trained, doing CTFs periodically to make sure their skills are up. But when we performed the pen test in there, it was actually a black box or red team operation that we performed. We were down to the last day and we had to finish the pen test. We got past physical security, got internally, was doing our scans, or doing our testing, trying to go undetected, but we had 8 hours left. So we had to start being more loud or disruptive in environment. So we were running Nessus vulnerability scanner, running Nmap, all these tools that should be easily detected. And we weren't detected. It took 12 hours before they even noticed we were there. So if your tools are not tuned well, all that noise will drown out any kind of possibility of detecting threat actors or any kind of malicious activity in your environment. And so don't trust, verify your security posture. So technical objectives testing, can attacker achieve domain admin, host compromise, domain user compromise, sensitive data, etc. Operational scenarios, is segmentation testing working, blast radius of specific creds, uh, also zero trust initiatives, working EDR and SIM. So back to kind of testing those controls as mentioned earlier, testing your segmentation testing within Node Zero. You can do your segmentation testing. You can deploy Node Zero into your different network segments to make sure that you're not able to get into those card data environments or your OT environments. And then business scenario testing. So uh, verifying SOC and MSP response, compromise uptime, compromise information, and gaining persistent access. So every time you update an application, patch a server, onboard an employee, your exploitable attack surface has changed. Attackers know this and time their actions accordingly. One of the things that in Horizon 3 that we got from a customer is you have Patch Tuesday, and everyone should have Pen Test Wednesday. Because what happens when you're patching, you want to make sure you're patching. But one of the things that happens with patching is threat actors and security researchers alike are going out there after Patch Tuesday, looking at these patches, seeing if there's ways they can bypass that, re-engineer their attack and exploit to be able to exploit those systems. So they're going in reverse engineering. And also along with that, if you're not keeping up with the patching, then the threat actors also are following that up. When Patch Tuesday comes out, new exploits are coming out soon. So they're leveraging those in their attacks. So AI lowers the barriers to all entry of cyber warfare. So domain compromised by chaining 5 different weaknesses together, no CVEs, as we mentioned earlier, kind of able to chain together all those weaknesses and vulnerabilities to gain access across 5 different hosts. So buried among 100,000 hosts and in minutes. So manual testing, the traditional way of testing, this is not going to be discovered in minutes. This is going to take a best case scenario. You're looking at hours. Maybe someone that's really talented coming there 4 hours, 8 hours. But with Node Zero, it's just a matter of minutes. So you're able to get domain compromise in that time. And you're able to take that time with your pen test team and dig deeper into other areas that are not normally getting tested as well. As I mentioned before, pen testing is referred to as a time box test, a snapshot in time. So you're able to go through and take advantage of having that more time, take advantage using this tool, and you're able to put it in the hands of lesser experienced professionals and those that don't necessarily even work on the red team or the pen test team. You can train the blue teamers to use this product, your vulnerability management teams. This is another tool to have in their arsenal to be more effective. After the vulnerabilities have been remediated, they can go back and easily test to see if they have successfully been remediated. So peacetime versus wartime security mindset. So this is, the typical, as we discussed, vulnerability scanning, annual pen test, annual tabletop exercises. We're secure, bring it on. But as this quote by Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So don't tell me you're secure, show me. And so kind of to summarize what we've discussed here is Node Zero is a force multiplier. It's a sparring partner for SecOps teams. So as mentioned here is displayed in purple team, using that purple team culture. IT ops proactively fix security issues, prove your ROI and posture. So what is our attack? What is our exploitable attack surface? How quickly did we fix the issues? How often are those issues reoccurring and why? So there could be something in your IT process that is going back and changing things. Maybe there's something in a group policy object that's reverting your vulnerabilities. So you're able to go through and quickly test, and you can work towards finding out the why. How effectively we detect and respond to the pen test? And did the new policies address our systematic issues? And so that concludes the presentation, but Node Zero continuously find, fix, and verify your exploitable attack surface. And reach out to your Optiv account rep for more details. They can give you a demo and give you more information on the product.